Welcome back in to the David L. Gray Show, voicing truth and reason. Have a new guest on the show, Jason Tomero. He's coming on the show to talk about his conversion story to the Catholic Church and out of Freemasonry. So it's going to be a fascinating show. So let's get going. This is the David L. Gray Show, the best and most honest podcast in Catholicism. Let's go.
Hovering over the skies of a post-Christian society, we have spotted a man with a donut in one hand and rosary beads in another.
Child, I'm about to whoop Satan's behind.
He is boldly proclaiming truth and reason like no rigid Catholic ever has before. The David L. Gray Show begins now.
Jason Tomero, welcome on to the David L. Gray Show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, David. Thank you for inviting me onto your show. It was a pleasure to meet you a few weeks ago out here in Chicago. I feel like you gave a great presentation to the audience that day, and luckily we were able to bump into each other in the lobby there, and exchange a few words, and so here I am. So.
Yeah. It's like, that's one of the first times I give a lot of talks, and that's probably one of the first times that I've had a few people come up to me after my talks who are like women, like, hey, I either like I'm an Eastern Star or somebody in my family's a Freemason or something like that. But I think you were the first time that a former Freemason had come up to me and said, hey, our stories are like kind of similar. And I was like immediately fascinated by your story. We talked a little bit, said, hey, I gotta have you on the show because I want to hear more people hear your story. So thanks again for coming on.
You.
So I guess we could start from just like your faith background. We can go back a little bit, just talk about who is Jason, as a child, and tell me a little about your faith experience.
So my faith experience. I grew up Lutheran. So my mom's parents took me to church, every Sunday. And I guess as a teenager, it really didn't stick in the end. And I think around that time I had friends that were giving me other books on Buddhism and things like that. So I studied Eastern philosophy for a number of years. I actually went to see the Dalai Lama speak in Madison in my 20s.
Wow.
And I felt like even though there are some little gems of truth that may be in the Dhammapada, ultimately Buddhism is an atheist religion. So studied that for a long time, but I don't know, I guess I never really considered myself to be Buddhist. I was more, I would say, agnostic than anything at the time. When you're young, sometimes you're really liberal, and I kind of, was involved a little bit with this group called the Unitarian Universalists, who they kind of pick and choose, what they want from each religion, and it's kind of more of a faith than it is a religion.
And don't they have like don't they have like their own like version of the Bible or something like, or they have like their own set of scriptures?
They like I said, they kind of pick and choose different things. I mean, but it's very liberal. I remember being there one time for or it was around Easter time, and they were playing Beatles. They were playing the "Here Comes the Sun," by the Beatles, wow. and instead of having the normal communion that we're used to, it was like a cup of seeds and some grape juice. So very liberal. But I think I kind of got involved with them, through just different things, I guess, that were going on politically at the time. Maybe during the beginning of the Iraq invasion. And
okay, so this is like the mid '90s, around there, something like that.
Yeah. So anyway. But so I wasn't really practicing anything for quite a long time, and said so I basically had a job, and that was I was working night shift for a long time, for a good 7-8 years at this point, and I had a home with a woman that I was engaged to, but we weren't married. She was actually atheist, and
How's
wasn't
that?
really practicing.
How's that working out for you? Because you were kind of like agnostic back then. You're like kind of, I guess you were searching for truth in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
And
yeah. I
how
was
did it
still.
work out? Being like, was the having a woman who you're potentially going to marry an atheist? Was that something that made sense for you back then?
Yeah, in a sense, because it really was kind of a non-issue, and you know how it is sometimes where there are liberals that will accept things like Buddhism freely, but they will
Yeah,
reject Christianity in a heartbeat. So
yeah.
at the time, it really wasn't an issue. And
Hmm.
like I said, I worked nights for a long time, many years, and I finally got onto a day shift. But in that time of working all those night shifts, I lost contact with a lot of my friends, which in hindsight was probably a good thing and a blessing in a way. But I wanted to start connecting with men that I felt were positive,
Okay.
positive in the community, and that's where my interest in the Shriners began. Okay,
Okay. So
so
you were initially interested not in like the craft lodge, like the Masonic Lodge, the Blue Lodge. You were more interested in what the Shriners were doing with the hospitals and the circuses
yes,
and everything they were doing in the community.
yes, the
Right.
philanthropy aspect of the Shriners is what really um, gained my interest in the beginning.
Okay.
And so I think I probably just went on to their website online and, just asked how do you become a member? And they said, well, you have to be a Freemason first.
Hmm.
And so I then applied to my local lodge there in Illinois, Northern Illinois. And they basically, it's not much different than filling out a resume. And, they bring you in and kind of give you an interview just to see the type of a man you are, because you got to have a couple people basically vouch for you.
Hmm.
So it turned out there were a couple guys that I knew from previous jobs or went to high school with that were in that meeting, so they vouched for me.
Oh wow.
And but it's funny now, now that I'm Catholic. I mean, I remember at the time one of the questions that they asked me was, does your church have a problem with being a Freemason? And so I said, well, I'm not really practicing anything, but I'm not an atheist. Um, and that's the thing. I mean, you can be. That's the thing
Yeah.
with Freemasonry is it's a universalist fraternity. So as long as you're not an atheist, you are free to join, unless
Yeah.
they don't accept your membership for any reason.
Yeah. So I
So
want to
so
back
that's
up
how
a
it
little bit
started.
just to I was back up a little bit just to like get some like clarification. People are listening who don't understand what's going on at
Yeah.
this point. Um, so it's pretty clear, you were interested in the Shriners, so you went to the website and you saw
Yep.
that it's kind of like a feeder type of thing. If you want to be a Shriner, well,
Yeah.
you first got to be a Freemason. You first got to go to the craft lodge, and then you can
Right.
petition to be a Shriner. So what Jason's talking about here, and this is David L. Gray Show, voicing truth and reason. He's talking about one of the first things when you're going through the petitioning process for a lodge, you have to be investigated. And so
Yes.
Freemasons have what's called an investigation committee that they'll set up.
Yep.
And so they'll inquire about the people who, want to be members. Sometimes, lodges are different. Some lodges may want to visit your house. And what
Right.
Jason experiences that. So you actually went to the Masonic Lodge and kind of sat down for like sort of like type of interview type of thing.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And how many people you think were like on the committee that were in the room that day?
There were probably four
Oh,
gentlemen that
okay,
were there,
okay.
and,
So that's yeah,
and like I
that's
said, two of the four I knew from work experience and high school.
yeah, that's pretty
So
standard. Yeah.
yeah.
So what type of other questions were they like interested in knowing about you?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
What other types of questions were they interested in
And
knowing?
knowing about me.
Yeah.
It's just the typical questions that they have in that investigation. I mean, they always want to know what type of work you do.
Mm,
Maybe how long you resided in the state. Just really
hmm.
general questions.
Yeah.
I mean, sure that they want to make sure that you don't have any type of criminal history or anything like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
And so what happened next?
So after that, initial investigation or interview, basically, from what I understand, then that gets submitted in the next meeting,
Okay.
and then the members as a whole, they vote on that. And so basically, it's an old school way of doing it. They got a box, and they got a white ball and a black ball. I mean, that's basically where the term, if you ever heard the term black ball,
Yeah.
that's where it comes from, because like I said, it's unanimous or anonymous when they vote, but if they open that box and there's a black ball in there, then your petition is rejected, and you
Yeah, it
cannot
has to
become
be
a member of
unanimous.
that lodge.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
So
it has to be unanimous. So that's interesting. So what was going at? I mean, did you were still with your fiance at the time, who's an atheist, right?
yep.
And what did she think of the whole Freemason thing? Was that like an issue at home or anything like that?
No, the Freemasonry was never an issue. That's kind of the funny thing. At the time, it became an issue later when I became Catholic. Then it became an issue, a big issue.
Oh
But
wow.
when I was a Mason, no, it was never an issue, because it's universalist in that sense. So you know,
You and I have a lot of That's pretty similar to to my experience. That's interesting.
yeah,
So you eventually, you get admitted into the lodge and everything. Um, did anything like was anything like weird that you find? Did anything like because you're a Gnostic? I mean, you're not, but you're like still searching for truth. You seem to have
right,
um some sort of trajectory that you're on.
right.
So was Freemasonry on that trajectory? What I mean by that, was there anything about your experience of being initiated into lodge that seemed just like kind of that didn't vibe with your spirit as being like good, or was there anything sort of off about going through that whole thing?
In the beginning, it really wasn't, because like I said, I was pretty liberal, and
Mm-hmm.
I really hadn't found and really accepted Jesus Christ into my heart,
Okay.
So it is, if you're in a Masonic lodge, in a Blue Lodge, or any other lodge, you could. I mean, they always have a Bible that's open for the
Yeah.
meetings, but let's say if there's another member that is Muslim, let's say, you would have a
Hmm.
Quran right next to the Bible, and those two books, in their eyes, they hold equal weight.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And so and it was the thing too, was like, the Masons, they refer to God as the great architect. You will never hear the
Mhm.
word Jesus Christ in a Blue Lodge.
Right.
Um, so there's things I can look back on now and said, yeah, that, had it been Catholic, it would be a whole different,
Oh yeah.
whole different. Because I see my life in a totally different lens now than I did, 7 years ago. But
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess those would have been like red flags immediately if like you're a Christian. That's why I kind of always been surprised by how many Protestants just accept that sort of thing, like having to. It doesn't happen, I guess, too often. It depends, what type of city you're in, but or type of lodge you're in, how diverse it is.
yeah,
But I mean, just the idea itself that if that needed to be the case, that you had a Muslim brother in the
yep,
lodge and he wanted his holy book on the altar,
yep,
the idea that both books would be considered to be equally true, just the idea
right,
of indifferentism and that there's nothing exceptional about Christianity, that would just seem to strike me as a little bit off,
yeah,
even as a Protestant.
right,
But as you're getting to know, as you're going through the degrees, or when you're finally raised to the degree of Master Mason, now you're in a lodge and going to meetings.
yeah.
Were you encountering people who identified or that you knew were Catholics at all?
No, no,
Hmm.
honestly, it seemed like that lodge meetings, honestly, they swayed a lot from talking about religion or politics. It was really
Yeah,
forbidden,
yeah,
so the stuff like that didn't really come up a whole lot. Um, I remember there were certain degrees that happened later on when I branched out into other avenues of Masonry where there was
Yeah.
Korans there, and it did not sit well with these brothers that were there, and they're kind of like, what did we just see? What was this about? And oh well, then they kind of got this is just like a historical thing, or
Hmm.
but as far as the degree goes, but I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's get into that in a
so
minute.
it's they take how the degrees are, they all always kind of try to incorporate some kind of universal truth
All
within
right,
these degrees, but
all right,
ultimately
right.
is not the truth of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So
Now, before you were like coming into uh, getting initiated, had you done any research? So the reason why I asked that, because when I was a Freemason, and for probably most of my time in a craft lodge, I think I served on the investigation committee. So I was
you did okay.
responsible for bringing like a lot of men into the lodge. And so one of the questions that I always ask, like, what got you interested? And it's typically always two answers, men who wanted the brotherhood, men who had saw things we did in the community, said, hey, I want to be a
Yep.
part of that. Or
Yep.
you had men who were like, you guys, understand that you have some insight to things that can make me a better man, or they're
Right.
interested in like the secret knowledge or anything, something like that.
Right.
Had you heard anything about Freemasonry being sort of Gnostic like that, having so-called secret knowledge and mysteries and all those things? Had you heard about that?
I had heard about those things, but not in a lodge setting, ironically
Mm,
enough. So, once I became got my third degree and was a master mason, I linked
okay.
up on social media with a lot of other masons, throughout the United States, throughout the world, and especially when it got into like the Scottish Rite, you had two jurisdictions. You had the northern jurisdiction and
Yeah.
southern jurisdiction. So what I was hearing from a lot of these guys was that the degrees were different in the South,
Yeah.
and that there was a lot more of this esoteric or occult knowledge, so to speak, that was being handed down. I mean, you would never hear anything like that, in a Blue Lodge or your typical meetings. So I feel like probably Freemasonry it's changed. It's probably been watered down a lot than maybe it was 100 or 200 years ago or longer. And it's like you go through these rituals, but they don't really describe them in that depth. You know what I mean?
Mm,
So
yeah.
I really
Yeah. I see
started
what
to have to go online in a sense
yeah.
and buy these older Masonic books that were from the late 1800s, early 1900s. There was like
Yeah.
an old encyclopedia that I had, and so I mean, it was in a sense. I mean, especially if you were in the northern jurisdiction, it was kind of like you had to kind of find that out and do your research on your own, because you were never going to get it from maybe the Blue Lodge member that's been the member for 30, 40 years. I mean, they're just going there to in their eyes, help the community, or
Yeah.
better themselves, or just have fraternity among men.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I think I found out to be true as well that there's seemed to be like a lot of self study people who were
yeah,
then the lodge itself, even during the second meeting of the month, typically if you were in that type of lodge, your ritual meeting, where you're doing degree work, or you may have a
mm-hmm.
lecture or something like that, or a table lodge. It was still pretty basic, wasn't anything like earth shattering
Right,
typically, but yeah, so it was like a lot of independent learning if you're interested in that type of
yep,
extra type of knowledge. So as you're getting into that stuff, I guess we could start with the other aspect. So you became a master mason. You're raised to what they call a sublime degree of master mason.
right.
Um, and the whole death of Hiram Abiff,
The
and
Hiram Abiff, yep.
yeah, that whole thing, and then what avenues did you go down next, as far as what Freemasons may call either typically not higher degrees, or they may
Yeah.
say more
The more
light
the
for advanced degrees and things like that.
right.
What avenues did you go down first?
So I think a lot has changed with Freemasonry, and it's not what it was maybe in the 1950s, where let's say maybe you were a third degree Mason, maybe you had to go and learn every chair within that lodge
Yeah,
before you could become a Shriner or
yeah.
a member of the Scottish Rite or
Explain
York
to people
Rite.
what you mean by that. Explain what learn every chair. What does that mean? Explain that.
You know, so basically there's just basically when a Mason runs their meetings, there are certain titles that you have, and you learn that position,
Hmm.
and you hold that position for a year. You have to commit everything to memory. Every little walk, every little turn, everything they do. That's part of this meeting, and the degrees you learn. And I
Yeah,
mean, years ago you had to learn it all, and basically up to the point where you became the worshipful master of the lodge. Who the worshipful master basically he's the guy that's in charge of everything as far as running the lodge for
yeah,
that year. So it used to be years ago you had to go through all of that before you could even apply to any of these other fraternities that within the fraternity, so to speak.
yeah,
So I kind of took the shortcut route because, like I said, my main interest was becoming a Shriner.
yeah,
There wasn't really that much. I mean, I had some interest. It was nice to get around other men and be able to have some camaraderie, but I didn't really have that much interest in learning everything with the Blue Lodge. So pretty much, what I mean. So pretty much when I got my third degree, I pretty much I didn't accept a position within the lodge, and I applied to become a Shriner,
yeah.
and was involved with that a little bit, and then it's weird. Like you kind of just get this. It's almost like a bug in a sense in you, where you get in one fraternity and it's like you want to find out about another
Right,
one and another one.
right, right,
So
right, right,
within
right.
probably less than 2 years time, I was involved with the Shriners. I applied. I was in the Scottish Rite and the York
Mhm.
Rite. Um,
Oh, so in your jurisdiction at that time, were you were able to become a Shriner after your third degree? You didn't have to become a 32nd.
Correct.
Ah, okay,
Yeah,
okay, okay,
because
okay.
the 32nd is that's the Scottish Rite. That's a
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
totally different branch.
yeah, yeah. I
So
remember when they changed that. There, you probably heard about this. There used to be a time when, um, probably I think early as like maybe early as 1992 or before that. Um, you had to be either be a Knights Templar or a Scottish Rite, and I think it
mm-hmm.
had to be sometime in the 90s or something that they changed that. I think it was largely the Shriners. The membership was dwindling and things like that, and so they had
Yeah,
negotiated an opportunity with the Grand Masters, of course, of the
right.
jurisdictions, so that they can
That,
just
that you
accept
are
third
correct.
third degree Masons. So that's
You are
interesting. You came
correct on
in,
that.
yeah, yeah. So
Now that you
that's
mentioned that,
interesting.
because I remember an older brother at the time was talking about that, and that was kind of the thing. It was like, okay, once you have did all these degrees and did all this work, then it was kind of like the Shriners were kind of like the party
Yeah,
bunch. You know what I mean? That was all about
yeah,
fun, and or that's how they spun anyway. So,
yeah. So
but
that was you achieved your goal. One of your goals. You want to be a Shriner. Became a Shriner.
yeah,
Were you happy? Did you? What was that? What was that experience like?
I mean, like I said, it was always giving to your community is going to be a rewarding thing. And I can never say that was a bad thing, even though, like I said, it is a universalist fraternity. But, around that time is like kind of when my eyes started opening to a few things. And you kind of alluded to what I'm about to say is like when they kind of changed the rules, so to speak, you had almost like infighting between the groups
Oh,
because now let's say you got a brand new master mason that's hit his third degree, and
hmm,
he can join the Shriners now. He can be Scottish Rite, he could be York Rite, and all three of those groups want you to be a part of their group.
Yeah.
So it was like, I'd be at meetings, and like the Scottish Rite people would be upset because maybe this Master Mason now wants to become a Shriner, but the people in the Scottish Rite were the ones that they were basically doing all the degree work for the for the guys in the Shriners. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it was, you know what I mean? So it's supposed to be like we were this one big happy fraternity, but when when you got really down into the trenches like that, you could definitely see some infighting,
Yeah.
and it was open. It was open in the
Yeah.
meetings.
That's
So
something. That's one thing I probably
that kind
never
of turned
talked
me
about.
off. To be honest.
I probably never talked about. Yeah, that's that turned you off. That infighting with ones. It's supposed to be brothers, right?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
probably one thing I never talked about in my videos is that you don't find a whole lot of men in Freemasonry who are like super active in like every single house that they're in. So they're going to be a member of the lodge. They're going to be a member
Yep.
of the Scottish Rite. They're going to be a Shriner. They're going to be a member of the Royal Arch and Royal Select
Yep.
and Knights Templar. There may be Eastern Star. Very few men are like going to go to like every single one of those meetings every month, maybe sometimes
Right.
twice a month. So typically, what you find is that guys may be interested maybe just in one. He may just be just the Master Mason. He may just be
Right.
interested in the Blue Lodge, or he may just be interested in the Shriner. So I guess sometimes what happens, I recall that there's some animosity in the
Yeah.
smaller houses, especially like something like
Yep.
the Royal Select or Knights Templar. Like, hey, we're barely having enough people for meetings, but everybody's going to the Shriners. Their meetings are full and stuff like that. So,
Right.
um,
I
I
mean, I
don't think
think
there's
there.
anything compared to in Catholicism. We wouldn't even. There's nothing even to make an analogy.
Yeah. But I think they're all struggling right now. I
Hmm.
mean, it's a lot. I mean, pretty much any social club, even like the Lions Club, or I mean Rotary Club, all
Yeah.
these social groups as a whole are struggling. I mean, like our society is not what it was 40 years ago or more, with social media and everything that we have now. And
Yeah.
so it's yeah, it's hard for them to keep their lodges open, because they have to donate so much money as it is just to be considered a 501c3.
Yeah.
And so they're just bleeding money on top of bleeding money, because I mean then they got to pay for their building expenses with their lodge. So in the time I was there for only 3 years or so, I mean I saw a number of lodges in the area close, and they basically were all trying to consolidate
Wow.
into one lodge. Yeah,
Wow.
there was. Yeah, so it's
Wow.
becoming. It seemed like it's becoming smaller, but I mean, I think it's probably never going to go away. I mean, there's always going to
Yeah.
be that interest
Yeah.
that men are going to have.
Yeah.
Especially when you get into the things like I mean, George Washington and the founding fathers of the United States. That's going to have a lot of appeal to people.
Yeah. That always has that appeal. Hmm. So, what else is going on during those 3 years that impressed you or were like red flags? Can you think of anything else?
I mean, one of the things that I still feel like really impressed me was that they really had a code, even when they had their when you go to a Masonic meeting, you go in a full suit.
Yeah.
So they're very professional in that aspect. That always really impressed me.
Hmm.
And it's I remember becoming a third degree Mason, and I mean I had a stack of business cards. I probably had 30 cards in my in my hand,
So there's
because
a lot of networking.
yeah, and again, that's where the old term "can I get a square deal?" That's where it comes from. So what I mean, and I've heard this about Mormons too, but what I mean, where what I mean, you kind of help each other out with business and things like that. So yeah, I mean, if I was,
Mhm.
let's say I need to go get a new refrigerator, I'm gonna go buy it from my brother Mason, and maybe he's gonna
Mhm.
give me a better deal than just a random salesperson.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. There's that aspect, and that's really one of the most historical things that's been with Freemasonry for hundreds of years. Because it starts off prior to 1717 when the Grand Lodge forms.
Mhm.
Um, it's largely a guild system, and the
Yeah.
stonemasons, they were always the wealthiest of the guilds, more than the carpenters, more than the seamstress, more than all the other guilds, because they're the work they were doing on the castles and the monasteries. These just like big building projects, so they always had the
Yeah.
money. So
Yep.
eventually the guild system starts to wind down, and a lot of guilds start to come into the stonemasons guild, the tapestries and the iron workers and everything. So
Right.
it was interesting during the early 1700s when this merging of the smaller guilds started to happen as we started moving to the industrial age. Is that you come to the stonemasons guild meeting and you had all these different organizations there, and it really worked. It was really beneficial for the stone guilds because now everybody's here. You had the iron workers, you had guys working with making curtains and all this stuff. And so this idea of the lodge being a place to make business connections and make deals and find people you
Yeah.
can work with, it just
Yep.
always been there.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the things that um, you were talking about, the social aspect of Freemasonry and the networking
Yep.
side of Freemasonry. And
Right.
so I guess maybe that side will, I guess, always be there. But as far as like the esoteric knowledge, those things that you started to look into, did that impress you, or did it bore you, or what was your impression when you're reading people like Pike and Manly Hall and all these Claude and all these older guys? And what was your impression of them? Were they lunatics or were they knowledgeable?
I mean, yeah. If you get into the volumes of Albert Pike, I mean, you can't deny that that man was very intelligent. Um, so, but I mean, even going through all that stuff, I guess in the end, it just never clicked.
Mm,
It never, what I mean? And I think it just it all kept going back to this idea of all these religions being on equal playing field. And I think that's what I always kept coming back to.
really?
Yeah.
Huh. Did I rub you wrong?
Yeah. I mean, even though I wasn't Catholic at the time, it just I don't know. I think that's maybe subconsciously that's maybe what stuck out. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and it just yeah.
Yeah. I get kind
So
of bored with it myself. I think what bored me eventually with Freemasonry, where I got more interested into like the whole administrative side, and was it's just so repetitive. You mentioned this earlier. It's like the degrees always took these historical events that were oftentimes, I guess, real historical events, but they added a little bit of fiction to a little bit of spice or
right.
whatever, some sort of historical grievance. Like, I mean, you and I didn't experience this, but in the southern jurisdiction, they got the whole Knight of Kadash degree. Where I did a video about this, where they step on the papal tiara and all this stuff.
Mhm.
And we don't experience those degrees, but we read about them in the northern jurisdiction.
Right.
It is just that one always struck me as funny because I wasn't a Catholic or anything like that. Obviously, wasn't French, so I didn't really care about them stepping on the crown of the French King Philip. But
Right.
it's just always funny to me that these historical degrees, even the knighthood degrees, it's just always like some like historical grievance in there. Like these adult men having, they're still mad about something that happened to the Knights Templars,
Right.
hundreds of years ago. But then the aspect of it that so this thing happened in history, and now this is what this is supposed to teach you. And here is a
Right.
sign to go with it and a secret password to go with it.
Right.
After guys like you and I, we experience, all the 32 degrees and then more degrees, we get all these
Mhm.
degrees.
Yeah.
After a while, it's just like, is there anything new? It's just this whole repetitive. Here's a historical event. Here's a sign. Here's a
Yeah.
lesson. Here's how you wear your apron. Is there anything more than this? And I just got,
Right.
is that all you guys have to offer? Is this the big secrets? It
Right.
was it was just really redundant. That's That was my experience.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, like I said, because it wasn't anything like you came away from a degree and you had this grand epiphany. You know, it was like I said, more kind of just common sense knowledge. You know,
It was just common
right?
sense knowledge. It was. Yeah. Yeah, that was, and hopefully somebody listening to this video who was interested in being a Freemason, maybe you heard some things. No, it's everything Freemasonry has to teach you. You can probably find on Google. You know, if you want to learn
Yeah,
how to be a better man, obviously become a Catholic and receive the sacraments. But there's no like, there's nothing secret. I guess
right.
what is secret about Freemasonry, Jason? What is secret about it? What would you say?
Like I said, there's secrets that are within it. Like I said, that you've got obviously the handshake. So I'll tell you this. I mean, it's. I had a friend, a brother that he was at the time. He was looking for work out of state. He was trying to go back to Kentucky. Okay,
Hmm.
and from Illinois, he was trying to get into this business down there, and he went basically to a Blue Lodge meeting down there, and I mean they gave him basically the full examination. And what I mean by that for your viewers is like when you when you become when you're going into the Blue Lodge, they give you it's this little book called the Catechism, and the
Yeah,
Catechism is this whole series of answer and
yeah,
response, and
yeah.
that goes pages and pages deep. So you know when he, like I said, he tried going out of state, networking some Masons down there, and I mean these brothers, like, even though he had his card, they really held him to it. That he
So you
actually
say his
knew,
card? You mean, we say card? You mean like
our
his
membership
membership
card.
card,
Yeah,
proving his
yeah,
membership? Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, I mean, if you're traveling or things like that, then it could be beneficial. Like, again, just going back to like work or labor relations, things like that. But
Yeah,
um,
yeah. I guess again that touches on one of the earlier aspects of Freemasonry. A Mason who was a stonemason, he's at least a fellow craft. He can travel around Europe and he could find
yeah,
work. So yeah. I wouldn't deny that. I think that is a unique thing. It was when I was a Freemason. It definitely benefited me, building those networking connections, and sometimes it got me out of trouble too. So,
yeah.
um, so what eventually? Let me ask you this first, Jason.
Hmm.
We're speaking with Jason Tamero. He is a Catholic convert. This is the David L. Gray Show, voicing truth and reason. So, what did you know about Catholicism
I,
by
I
this
really
time?
didn't know any. So what led me to Catholicism? It's very interesting. Something I never ever expected that was going to happen. It actually
Mhm.
came through a Facebook post. If you can believe that. My cousin's wife, Janet, she had posted on Facebook this story that one of the Cleveland news stations had done about a woman that was from my hometown in Canton, Ohio, named
Mhm.
Rhoda Weiss. So her proper title right now is Servant of God Rhoda Weiss. So
Yeah.
she's in the process of sainthood. So Cleveland News did a story on Rhoda Weiss. The YouTube video is still there. I still go
Hmm.
back to it every once in a while. It's about 3 minutes, but
Wow.
um, her story was so fascinating in so many ways. David, she was a stigmatist, okay, in the 1930s, and most people don't know about her. So the fact that there was a woman that had stigmata in my hometown, I thought to myself, well, I'm in Chicago, but maybe the next time I'm back in town visiting family, I got to check
Yeah.
this out as a
Yeah.
spectator, right? So in my mind, it was just it was too interesting not to experience, right?
Interesting.
So yeah, so at the time, it'd been even like 2 years since I had seen this video, and I remember I had a call from a family member of my aunt. She said, hey, you really need to get in town. Your grandmother's not doing well, and thank God, I made it there in time to see her, and because she ended up passing away, the very next day. But the crazy thing was when I left seeing her to go visit my dad.
Yeah.
I had failure with my van at the time, and I mean, and it was on like the very last mile. So you're talking about an 8-hour trip. On the very last mile of this trip, I couldn't basically, I could barely drive. It was my van wasn't going more than 20, 30 miles an hour.
Oh,
It ended up being a coil that needed to be
Mhm.
fixed. So luckily, my uncles and my dad, they're very knowledgeable with, uh, you know, fixing cars and things. So I got it back and running. But, and then in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, man, there was something in town that I wanted to go see. And then I was like, oh yeah, it's Road West House.
Yeah.
So I remember going there, and David, like, it's funny to me now because when you think about Catholic buildings, like you got grand basilicas and shrines that are talking like multi-million-dollar buildings, right?
Yeah.
So the Rhoda Weiss home at the time in the 1930s, this was like a Depression era shack, and I mean they even had to expand it to like it's basically like a double wide trailer so that people can when they have tour buses they can actually fit the people inside there.
Oh, wow.
So, so I remember just going, and then they have a really small grotto that's next to it. I mean, it holds maybe 2 people comfortably, But before I went into the house, I remember going into the grotto, and it was the first time I had prayed in decades, and I said, "Thank you, God, for letting me see my grandmother one last time."
Wow.
And
Yeah.
after that, I go into the Rhoda Weiss home, and they're in Canton, Ohio, and there are many things that are in there that are fascinating. There's a lot of relics that are there. The bandages that she had on her during the stigmata, the dress is still there, covered in blood.
Wow.
There's a lot to her story. She also was a convert. She had a stomach ailment. She had like a 30-pound tumor. Okay, that was in her, and she was in a Catholic hospital, and the nuns they taught her how to pray the Rosary, and by the grace of God, she converted,
Yeah.
became Catholic, but ultimately they sent her home to die. Okay, so she shouldn't have made it.
Yeah.
When she got back home, she started doing a novena to Saint Therese of Lisieux. She was very fond of Saint Therese, a little flower. Okay, so after she completes this novena, Rhoda Weiss she received a visitation from Saint Therese. Saint Therese put her hand on her stomach, and it was healed instantly. I mean,
Wow.
and prior to that, it was so bad that the bandages couldn't even keep the situation intact.
Wow.
So there's a lot that is behind this story of Rhoda Weiss. Okay, and so she was visited by Saint Therese. She was visited by Jesus Christ himself.
Wow.
And you could see pictures, because there were like thousands of people that were outside. You could see pictures where before he appeared, and during the time he did appear, and the illumination that came out of this home. From what I understand, there was only a Monsignor that was there with her at the time. But what a lot of people don't know is that this was also the place that Mother Angelica had a healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mother Angelica was also from Canton. She
Yeah.
was good
Yeah.
with Rhoda Weiss, and Mother Angelica had a situation like stomach ailment, something that turned in her stomach, and basically the same thing. Bro says, you need to do a novena to Saint Therese of Lisieux, and well, her name was Rita Rizzo at the time, but she does it, and she was healed, and then ultimately Rita Rizzo becomes Mother Angelica,
Yeah.
and the rest is history.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and what was really fascinating was that talking to some of my family back there, it turns out I have a family that knew her. They grew up in the same old Italian neighborhood. They're in Canton, and they kept in touch even to the time they were deceased, which was really
Wow.
my fault that I had not known that. So basically, I went into this home, David, knowing nothing about Catholicism, and that experience was so powerful. I couldn't deny it wasn't real. I mean, not only that. I mean, there's even like a little rose petal that's in there that has the image of Saint Therese in it as well. I mean, there's so much to this story. I know there's been a few other people that have done podcasts that are on YouTube, and I think EWTN has done a show or two recently.
Yeah.
But
So you're not Catholic. You don't know much about Catholicism. Um, you have a relative that sends you this video at a Cleveland news station about something that happened in your hometown. You're like, hey, this is interesting. I didn't know this. I'm from there. I'm going to go see it when I get home. You get an opportunity to go see it by God's grace. And I guess your experience there is just kind of transcendental. You just know that this is something real, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was like I said, it was so. Actually, this is her picture. What? It's her prayer card right here.
Oh yeah.
That's what she looks like. But yeah, it was so real that I couldn't deny it. So I drive back. So this, mind you, Dave, this happened on Holy Thursday, 2018. I had no idea what Holy Thursday was. So
yeah.
I drive back to Illinois.
You're a nice Templar, though. You probably may have got like a meeting notice about a Monday, Thursday, or something like that, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but it wasn't. It wasn't no stress. You know how it is.
Yeah.
So, so I get back to Illinois. I never went to a Catholic mass in my life, and I go to the church it was literally around the block from me. I mean, I could actually see the church steeple. I could hear the bells in that home ring every day. And I just remember walking in, talking to the receptionist, which was our deacon's wife, Diane. And I said, hey, I had this experience in Canton. I showed her the prayer card that I just showed. And I said, how do I become Catholic? And she's like, well, she's like, well, you just missed the class. Everybody just got confirmed a couple days ago on Easter. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But, looking back on it, though, David, it was such a blessing to me that it happened that way.
Why is that?
Because I had all that time, between the time just after Easter until maybe was it like October, typically where the RCIA classes start.
Okay.
So I had all that time to do research every day on my own. And I would usually go on YouTube or the internet and just I couldn't devour it fast enough.
Wow.
And I felt like each day my faith kept getting stronger. Like I said, because when I was Lutheran, I mean they never talked about saints or I mean, just when you get into the lives of the saints alone, I feel like you could study the lives of saints for the rest of your life and barely scratch the surface, because there's just so much to that alone.
Yeah.
And wanted to find more about Mary. Again, that was never a subject in the Protestant world. So so that happened on Holy Thursday, and in my process of doing this research, it was in June, a couple months later, this is June 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, Saint Therese of Lisieux had a lot to do with this story with Road Weiss. So I'm online, and I see in this shrine that was probably less than 2 hours north of me. It's up in Wisconsin. It's called Holy Hill. It's the National Shrine of Mary, Help of Christians. Want to make sure I got that title down right. So it's Carmelite, and beautiful. I would highly suggest everybody to see this, because it's quite impressive.
Okay.
But you're not going to find a Latin mass there, unfortunately. But anyway, so I'm very new to the faith, extremely new, and I I happened to stumble upon this website, and it was literally like that week they have this exhibit of Saint Therese of Lisieux. They have a bunch of her first class relics that are there, and they're doing a special mass to venerate it and everything. And so there's kind of like two chapels there. There's a smaller chapel that's in the middle, and the stained glass, the altar, everything is dedicated to Saint Therese. So I got there. I leave early in the morning. I get there maybe like 2 hours before this mass is supposed to start in the chapel above us, and I'm in there by myself. And it was like I obviously had not gone to my first confession at that point.
Yeah.
But I'm in there, and I basically just pour out my soul.
Wow.
In there. And David, I cannot make this up, but I literally caught like 2 breaths of. At first, I thought it was just like a woman that came behind me, and she had on some really strong perfume that smelled like roses. And
Yeah.
but I looked, and there was nobody there. And that really struck me as I'll still never forget that. I was in there by myself, and then maybe like 10, 15 minutes later, there was a whole bustle of they were probably Polish Catholics that came in.
Yeah.
They definitely had an Eastern European kind of accent going on, but
but
then it was like I said, maybe an hour and a half later, they had the main mass and the basilica above us.
Wow.
And that was something that still I'll never forget. And the kind of the crazy thing was too, is like, I was leaving. There's kind of like this little gift shop that was down there, and there was a one of the brothers that was talking to this other young man, and they were talking about football.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yo, you guys like football, and because I always have these prayer cards with me, and I'm like, hey, you ever go to see the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton? I'm like, you got to go see this.
Yeah.
The Road to Weishaupt,
Yeah.
And it was crazy because like the brother thanked me, but I didn't know it. I didn't know this at the time, but he had a relic of Saint Therese in his pocket. And he's like, he just asked me to hold out my hand, and he put it in my palm of my hand and like prayed over me, to have a successful conversion, and kind of gave me a little backstory what was going on with me. And so that was totally unexpected and powerful. That was a really amazing experience. So I'm going through the RCIA process and everything, and I get confirmed on April 20th of 2019. Now, what's funny too is that April 20th is Mother Angelica's birthday.
Wow.
And I thought, well, man, what are the odds of that? So I'm Googling, like, when was the last time Easter Vigil fell on April 20th, right? Turned out it was 57, something like that. So
yeah, pretty rare. Yeah.
That was kind of interesting odds. So I wrap up RCIA, and at the time, let's see. So around that time, that was about the time when remember hearing about when Venerable Fulton Sheen's body was moved from New York to Peoria. Okay, yeah. So I luckily I had some time off that weekend, and I drove from Rockford area south down to Peoria to go see Venerable Sheen. And at the time, also the whole McCarrick scandal was really big, and at the time it was kind of unfortunate in a way, because you didn't really hear too many Catholic speakers that had channels really talking about it too much, or addressing it from real concern, or giving it negative feedback, so to speak. And it felt like the only 2 guys that were doing it at the time were Taylor Marshall and Tim Gordon, when they had their TNT show. So, and it was kind of like, then you had like guys on the opposite end, like Father Mike Schmitz. Not to say that, I'm not going to discredit anything they do, but, in a way they kind of were like, I didn't really experience anything like that in seminary. And, So you had two very different stories that were going on, and then it was like when I talked to my priest, he was like, oh yeah, it was a big problem in here in Chicago, in Mundelein, because it's like I had to leave. I had to go to the East Coast just to be able to finish off the seminary.
Yeah.
So anyway, so like I said, Fulton Sheen, I go down there, and I think at the time I maybe had been to a Latin Mass once there in Rockford, and it was different. It's different at first, and but growing up Lutheran, I remember people telling me, "Oh, well, the Catholic Mass really isn't that different." It's and really, and really, when you compare a Novus Ordo Mass to a Lutheran service, it really isn't that different. Obviously, you have the formalities of confession and things like that within the Catholic Church, but it was really until I experienced the traditional Latin Mass and realized, well, wait a minute, this is the Mass that has been going on for 1,700 years.
Yeah.
And kind of how that came about, this was a lucky coincidence, I guess. I was down, like I said, in Peoria, trying to visit Fulton Sheen as his body gets down there, and I don't even think that this it's the St. Mary's Cathedral there in Peoria. I don't think they were even expecting his body to be back, because when I got down there, they actually had a wedding going on, and so we get we're in there, and they kind of just politely kick us out for a couple hours, and but luckily during that time, I was able to talk to a woman about my age who she had traveled from St. Louis, and she also was attending an Institute of Christ the King there in St. Louis.
Yeah.
So in that hour and a half of time, she gave me a lot of very good information on why I should really stick to the course of keeping with the Latin Mass. And I remember she said, if you do it, just do it for a month, and you probably won't want to go back to the new way. So, and she was right. So let's see. So basically, so I've got all that going on, and during those, let's say, 2 years of me being Catholic, I'm still living in the home that I had with the atheist fiance. Now, our worlds are at this point completely. We're living in two totally different worlds. We're basically living together. We're living together as brother and sister.
Yeah.
But luckily, I had a very good confessor on the traditional side that really gave me some tough love that I needed to hear. And was like, listen, thank God, you converted, but you can't expect somebody else to do that. And
I mean, did you was there like any work there on your part that tried to, because you had like an amazing journey to the Catholic Church. You experienced a lot of signs and miracles and all that. How did that sit when you try to communicate those things to her?
I think it ultimately, it just felt like the more graces that I got, it just the divide got wider, because it was just she was a staunch atheist. I mean, she had some feminist qualities to her that I could look back on now and see that was a big part of it too.
Yeah.
And like I said, we were living in two different worlds. We were living together for like those last 2 years, brother and sister. But this thank God this priest said, listen, you can't keep doing this, or I'm not going to give you that absolution.
Yeah.
And that's what I needed to hear. So, at that time, it was 2020. Pretty much the world has shut down, and because of what was going on, and with the virus, and
yes, I guess Chicago, you guys are like in like Shanghai, weren't you? In the Chicago area, you're just kind of like you weren't allowed out your house or you get shot, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So I mean, it's like that in certain parts of the city now, even without the virus. But that is the Chicago's got a lot of good points to it too, but unfortunately, you hear a lot of the more of the negative than the positives. But so yeah, things started shutting down, and so it was a blessing because it gave myself and her, I think, a lot of time to really reflect on the situation, because I think especially, we just had so much going on. We had a lot of distractions, and so basically, was kind of like, hey, I think it's time, that we end this. I ended up buying her out of the home, and here's the crazy thing, Dave. The day that she moved out basically she started moving all her stuff out was on Good Friday. And by the day she had everything out of that house, it was on Easter Sunday. So you have death and resurrection of a relationship ending and a whole new chapter beginning.
Yeah.
And I cannot get over the symbolism of that.
Man. Yeah.
And so I'm 40 years old at the time. And her famous last words to me were, well, you will never meet anybody Catholic. You will never be married Catholic. It will never happen.
What type of hater stuff was that? Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, there's some truth to. I was involved with a couple different parishes there in the Rockford Diocese, and those women are staying married. I mean, and
yeah. Oh, okay. I see. Yeah. So yeah.
And like dating in your 40s is nothing like dating in your 20s or your 20s. I mean,
that's a good point. Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It is.
So she was going there. So I decided, I know what my options are. And so I decided to do this crazy thing and put myself on Catholic Match.
Uh-huh.
And so Catholic Match, for your listeners out there that are single and you genuinely want to do this and find yourself a Catholic spouse, it's a really good tool. It worked for me. And
I guess it depends where you're at though, right, Jason? Because when I was on it, I was in Warren, Ohio. Right. I got a wife also divorced me when I, the Catholic thing was a big deal. So, I stayed there in Xenia for like, I think a year. And then I moved back home because I had a house in Warren. And some discerning becoming a priest, and I'm probably discerning pretty fast out of that. But I'm still trying to maybe this can. But at the same time, I'm saying, well, maybe I'm called to marriage. So, I'm on. So first I go to Plenty of Fish, right? And then I realize the more you pay, the better options you get. And so
you're 100% right on that, David. I lasted like 2 days on Plenty of Fish, and I'm like, this is not for me. 2 days, I was done.
Yeah, because we didn't have Tinder back then. Well, I didn't have it back then, in the early. So I probably would have tried that too for a second. But so I was on Catholic Match for a moment. But I guess I think if I was like in like a Chicago area, I probably would have better options than Warren, Ohio. But,
correct. I mean, the bigger population you have, the better odds you're gonna have. Yeah.
But did you find? I didn't find too many Catholic girls on there though, Jason. Because you can go because you check the list, right, to see who believes what.
Yes.
And all these girls, they all believed in like sex outside of marriage and women should be a priest. I mean, but I get you.
Yep. No, you're right, and that's what I was finding that too, was that maybe they were Catholic in name, but they weren't practicing Catholics.
Okay.
You know what I mean? If you are on there and you believe in abortion, then you're not Catholic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
okay, all right.
But like I said, I was living in the Rockford area at the time, and I remember setting you can pick a whole distance of about how far you're willing to travel.
Okay.
So I set mine at 75 miles. Okay.
75 miles? That's 75. Detroit. Oh my gosh.
So, but in my mind, I'm thinking, because I'm living in like northern Illinois, almost on Wisconsin border. So I'm thinking, okay, Milwaukee, not that far. Madison, not that far. And David, I didn't want anything to do with Chicago, okay, at all. And so I ended up meeting my wife on Catholic Match, and we our distance was 74 miles.
Wow.
So it literally
Wow.
came within like a mile. And
Wow.
yeah, and luckily, at the time everything was shut down. So I guess when I started getting used to Chicago driving, there wasn't as many people on the road. So that was again kind of a blessing. But I remember, we'd kind of met halfway in this little town called Woodstock, Illinois. Which Woodstock, they're famous. If you ever see the movie Groundhog Day, that little town square, that's where we met for our first date.
Okay.
And there wasn't even
Wow.
anything open. There was nothing open. We just sat on a park bench and we talked for like 3 hours, and
Wow.
that was it. And so then we were not going to live together before we got married, and so we did the whole back and forth, once, twice a week for about a year and a half. And I'll never forget this because my wife, so she's from Poland originally. She's been in the United States over 30 years, and but she grew up, during communism there, and her family immigrated here. And so, unfortunately, after about 3 months, I knew that this I wanted to marry this woman.
Yeah.
And so, but I knew I couldn't propose to her father because her father does not speak English. So I
Okay.
remember I wrote everything out on it. I wrote a little letter, and the parents were there, and they were crying, and they were so happy. And Dave, you ever hear the term like getting the parents' blessing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought that was always like a figure of speech, but it's not. So I'm there, the parents are crying, and so basically we're kneeling there, we're kneeling down. They've got they had a crucifix in their home that's been in there for generations. Okay, we're in front of this crucifix, and the parents literally blessed us with holy water. They crossed our foreheads. It was beautiful. So
Wow.
my mother-in-law speaks enough English. I can converse with her for the most part, but my father-in-law, only speaks Polish.
Yeah.
So there, and that's really the beauty of the Catholic faith is that even though we come from different parts of the world, we still have the same faith,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a really
Yeah.
beautiful thing. And I've been
You're the
closer to
second
her
guy
parents
on
than
the
anybody.
show. You're the second guy on the show because I had interviewed Robert Nugent last week on the show from the podcast, The Turn to Be Catholic, and so he's on the show, and he's telling me the story about he married a Polish woman, and now you're on the show talking about how you married this Polish. So it must be something. People in the audience, single men, there's something about Catholic Polish women that seems to be a good thing. So you
Yeah,
may want to check that
yeah, it
that
is.
out.
Now, if you talk to my wife, David, there differences. There's differences within, and it's just like the United States. Like if you're coming from the north,
Yeah.
you're going to be different than somebody from the south. So
Right. Right.
their region is all the way in the south, and they're in the Tatra Mountains. Their culture, they're called Highlanders.
Oh, so
So
see, that's another thing because there's a guy in my parish. I was telling Robert about this, who he's always telling his son and you got to marry a Polish woman, but can't be from the city. She has to be from the farm country. So
yeah,
there's
yeah,
something to this. Oh, okay, okay.
absolutely.
So all this is checking out.
Yeah, because people in the rural areas, they still are very connected to their faith. Absolutely.
Okay,
And
okay.
it is when you get into bigger cities, you have different ideas that kind of get
Yeah, a bunch of
ingrained
feminists.
with
Yeah,
society.
all right. So
So yeah,
one thing we didn't circle back on was Freemasonry. So how did you transition out of that, Jason?
oh, good question. So you maybe experienced this too, like during your time when you were Freemason, where maybe you'd have guys that would come in and then they would just stop coming to the meetings, they would stop
Yeah,
paying dues, and that you just really would never see them again.
yeah.
So what I did was I actually wrote formal letters and demitted from everything.
Okay. And
And while
by demitted, explain that to the audience, that process. They may have
well,
never heard of that word.
it's basically just saying that you no longer want to be. I basically said I no longer want to be a member, and it's basically on religious grounds, and that's something that they can't argue, because supposedly Freemasonry should never become before your God or your family, and
Right.
so they couldn't argue it, and I was able to leave, without any issues. I do want to say something though, David, because it's a book. There's a book that I discovered fairly recently.
Mm-hmm.
That's by Father Ripperger. It's called
Yeah.
Deliverance Prayers for the Use of the Laity.
Yeah.
So in this book, you got to go back into the appendix, but there's about, I don't know, a good 10 pages or so that you can read on breaking their prayers for breaking the Masonic curses.
Yeah.
So it goes through most of the degrees, the passwords. I mean, it's all laid out here in the book. So after I got it, I went into adoration and laid it out. And
But you had never been baptized before, right? Before you became Catholic, right?
yes, I was. I was actually baptized. I was baptized Lutheran. Yes.
Lutheran. You were.
So I didn't have to
Oh,
be. I
okay.
didn't have to be
Okay.
baptized again.
All right.
Because I believe unless you are baptized as a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness, then the Catholic Church redoes your baptism. But as long as your baptism is done in the name of the Father, Son,
Yeah.
and Holy Ghost, it's considered valid in the Church's
Yeah.
eyes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. That sounds good,
think.
man. Man, what a fascinating story.
Yeah. So I'm gonna tell you about something else too. There's something that goes on every year up in Green Bay. It's called the Walk to Mary, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a 21-mile pilgrimage. You do. It takes about 8 hours, but you go from the National Shrine of Saint Joseph to it's now they're calling it Our Lady of Champion. So that's
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
knows. Yeah, so
Yeah.
everybody knows about Guadalupe visiting, in Mexico, but she also appeared right outside of Green Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So, any of your viewers are not heard that story, look it up. It's very fascinating because it's actually one of the few places in the world over the church history that the church actually recognizes as a valid Marian apparition spot.
Yeah, fascinating, some miracles attached to it. So I've never been
Yeah,
there myself personally, but yeah, I definitely studied it. So yeah.
but when my wife and I were engaged, I had this idea of, okay, I need to see how we're going to work together as a team. So
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're gonna do this 21-mile walk and see how it goes. And tell you what, it was very well organized, plenty of water. Because everybody's first thought is, well, what if I have to use the restroom? And they have it all taken care of, so everything was clean, and it couldn't have been more well organized. But in
Yeah.
that time, it was kind of twofold because I wanted to see how well we're going to work as a team, and that exceeded my expectations because I think about by the 8th mile, I started getting blisters on the bottom of my feet, and but eventually I kind of just mentally hit this wall. I mean, we're praying, and I know the Our Father, and but it's like, I mean, it was almost like in this mental fog. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember I had like a 5-hour energy shot, and I wasn't a believer in those prior to that day, but it really helped me kind of get back on
Yeah.
track, and
Yeah.
we were able to finish the pilgrimage. But one of the things that the reason we went, because it was like, okay, we're dating. We got this like 75-mile gap. Like our wedding's coming up in less than 6 months. How are we going to do this? And so there was some grace that came out of that, and it was within probably 2 months, I got the answers that I needed to hear.
Man, yeah.
I was listening to another Catholic podcast, and at the very, very tail end, they talked about a company called Realty for Life. And
Yeah.
so Realty for Life, basically what they do is they will take a portion of your home sale and donate to a pro-life cause. And I thought, that's really interesting, because it took me a shock. It was kind of odd at the time, because I'd listened to a podcast, and it wasn't like it was at the beginning of the podcast. This was like an hour and 15 minutes at the tail end. I thought, man, that's really weird. Maybe this time I need to sell this house. Okay. So that stuck with me. And then, the very next morning, this was June. So you know what June is about, the LMNOP group. So that I drive to work, and that flag was there. They replaced the Illinois state flag with that flag. So I said, okay, God, you've given me the answer I need to do, and I'm out. So I felt like I really wanted to leave at that time, but I still had, I had a few months to wait out for the wedding, because, like I said, we firmly were not going to cohabitate for our wedding.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So we got, we had the wedding. I put the house up for sale. House sold within 2 days. Done. Was able to relocate in Chicago. God has exceeded every expectation I ever had as far as finding another job. Blessing, a huge blessing, more than I could have ever imagined, David.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens. Scriptures say, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and everything else to be added unto you. So when we obey God, we do the right thing, we follow the clear order. Those blessings just flow. They do. Even if we don't, even sometimes they flow, we don't even see them, but God honors his word. So, and he definitely blessed really you and your household. So that's a wonderful thing. Good to hear, Jason. All right, Jason Torres, thanks for coming on the David L. Gray Show, man. What a fascinating story, man. You took us from the beginning, from your Lutheran background all the way up to now to your beloved and you getting married, and what just looking back now, it's only been going on like 4 years, going on 3-4 years since your conversion. How would you kind of like, looking back now, how would you kind of like sum up the whole thing of what God's done for you?
I always tell people, as long as you put Jesus Christ first in your life, everything else is going to fall into place. And you have to really, really believe that. And if you do, it's going to happen. It may not happen right away, but you got to be patient sometimes.
Yeah.
Because it took a lot. It took a lot of steps for me to be where I'm at. I mean, I don't think most men would have stepped away from Freemasonry. I don't think most men would have stepped away from a relationship they were comfortable in for 7 years at that point. Most people really don't want to move to Chicago. But you know what I mean? But I look back on my life, what I have now, what God's given me now in my life to compare to my old life, and there's no comparison.
Yeah.
So you just got to trust. You just got to trust God, because he got something much bigger than sometimes we can even imagine. And that's been 100% true, what he's done for me in just the past few years. So
awesome. Yeah, that's why he's God, man.
Yeah.
Well, tell us how we can pray for you.
How can you pray for me? Just please, I would ask you just to pray to keep my marriage strong, keep my faith strong, and I would do the same for you as well.
All right. So we will pray for you we will pray for you, for your household and for your marriage and for all the blessings and graces that you need most. And thanks for coming on the David L. Gray Show, Jason Tamero.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me. God bless.
God bless. Thank you for watching the show. For more content, just smash that subscribe button and a notification bell, and you'll be notified whenever I upload new content. Hopefully, but not always, you'll get that notification. And also, please consider becoming a sponsor. of the show. You can do this a couple ways, either by going over to patreon.com/David O'Gray. And just for a couple dollars a month, you'll have access to all of our exclusive content over at stdominicsmedia.com, or become a YouTube member of this channel. And again, for just a couple of dollars a month, you'll have access to all the content on this YouTube channel that is older than 5 months. But either way, please keep me in your prayers and I'll keep you in mind. And remember that Jesus loves you and is there for you. Thank you.